The Echo Woman, Chapter 1. The Words of a Stranger. Charlotte, North Carolina, hummed with the vibrant energy of a modern southern city. For Eleanor Warren, at 55, life was meticulously ordered. A successful architect, she lived alone in a sleek, minimalist townhome, her days structured around demanding projects and quiet evenings. Yet beneath this veneer of control, a faint tremor of unease persisted. She harbored a nebulous, unsettling memory of a childhood trauma, a dark void in her early years that defied recall. She knew she had once had a younger sister, Sophie, but the details of Sophie's death, and indeed several years of her own childhood immediately following it, remained shrouded in an impenetrable fog. Her parents, both long deceased, had never spoken of Sophie, their silence a heavy, unspoken burden. Eleanor had learned to live with this fragmented past, rationalizing it as the mind's protective mechanism against pain. The void was simply a part of her story, a silent chapter she couldn't access. One Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor was navigating the bustling aisles of her local supermarket, her cart laden with groceries, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. Standing before her was an ancient woman, frail and stooped, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes startlingly blue and intensely focused. The woman, Mrs. Agnes Crowley, according to the name tag on her worn coat, peered at Eleanor with an unnerving familiarity. "You," Mrs. Crowley rasped, her voice thin but clear, sending a chill down Eleanor's spine. "You died in the last century. I remember." Eleanor froze, her hand hovering over a carton of milk. The words, so utterly bizarre, yet delivered with such conviction, struck her like a physical blow. She tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to senility. "I think you have me mistaken, ma'am," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Eleanor Warren." Mrs. Crowley's eyes, however, did not waver. They seemed to look through Eleanor into something far beyond. "No," she insisted, shaking her head slowly. "Not Eleanor. You were Sarah, and she died. Oh, I remember. The woods, the scream. You died, or disappeared. An echo, that's what you are. An echo." Then, as quickly as she had appeared, Mrs. Crowley turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the crowded aisles, leaving Eleanor standing amidst the bright lights and cheerful music of the supermarket, utterly disoriented and profoundly shaken. The words, "You died in the last century," echoed in her mind, creating a strange, painful resonance, a familiar ache now amplified. Her carefully constructed world, so orderly and rational, had just been breached by an impossible statement, a ghost from a past she couldn't remember. Chapter 2. The Haunted Woods. The encounter in the supermarket left Eleanor reeling. Mrs. Crowley's words, "You died in the last century," burrowed deep into her subconscious, stirring the dormant unease of her fragmented childhood. The partial amnesia, once a manageable blank space, now felt like a gaping wound, drawing her in. Night after night, strange, disturbing dreams began to haunt her sleep. A dense, dark forest, the chilling sound of a child's scream, a fleeting glimpse of a figure in the shadows, and an overwhelming sense of terror. She would wake in a cold sweat, the images vivid, but refusing to coalesce into a coherent memory. She tried to rationalize it, attributing it to stress, to a vivid imagination. but the persistence of the dreams, combined with Mrs. Crowley's unnerving certainty, compelled her to confide in her best friend, Mark. Mark, a pragmatic and grounded man who owned a quirky antique shop, listened patiently. His brow furrowed with concern. "Eleanor," Mark said, his voice gentle, "I know it sounds crazy, but this old woman, she genuinely believes what she said. What if there's a kernel of truth there? Even if it's just a misunderstanding, don't you want to know what she meant?" "This amnesia has always bothered you." Mark, ever the practical one, suggested finding Mrs. Crowley. A quick check with the supermarket staff revealed Mrs. Crowley's full name and a general address, a small, unassuming house on the outskirts of Charlotte. Driven by an inexplicable urgency, Eleanor drove to the address. The house was old, nestled amidst overgrown bushes, its paint peeling, its windows like vacant eyes. Eleanor hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was an architect, a woman of concrete plans and measurable spaces. Yet here she was, on the threshold of something intangible, possibly supernatural. She knocked. After a long moment, the door creaked open. Mrs. Crowley stood there, her frail figure silhouetted against the dim interior. Her startling blue eyes, even in the shadows, seemed to pierce through Eleanor. "You came back," Mrs. Crowley rasped, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I knew you would, Sarah." The name, Sarah, struck Eleanor with a jolt, an electric current of recognition she couldn't explain. It wasn't her name, yet it felt familiar, a ghost whisper in her own mind. "My name is Eleanor," she stated, trying to hold on to her composure. "No," Mrs. Crowley insisted, shaking her head slowly. "That's not your real name. You're Sarah. You're the echo of Sarah, the girl who died, and the girl who vanished, all those years ago, in the woods." Mrs. Crowley gestured for Eleanor to enter, her voice a low, urgent murmur. It was 1970, the Shenandoah National Park. Two little girls, sisters, Sarah and her younger sister Lily. They went missing. Only Lily's body was found, and Sarah vanished, or so they said. She led Eleanor to a cluttered living room, filled with stacks of old newspapers and dusty books. She pulled out a brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping, its edges frayed with age. The headline, stark and dramatic, screamed, "Local girls missing in Shenandoah woods. One found dead, sister vanishes." Eleanor's eyes widened, fixated on the photograph accompanying the article. It was a black and white photo of two smiling little girls. The older one, a bright-eyed child with a cascade of dark hair, was undeniably her. A younger, smaller girl, sweet and innocent, stood beside her. And the name beneath the older girl's photo: Sarah Johnson, age 8. Beneath the younger girl's photo: Lily Johnson, age 5, found deceased. The article detailed the tragic events. Two sisters, Sarah and Lily Johnson, had gone missing in Shenandoah National Park. Lily's body was found days later, the cause of death unclear, officially ruled an accident. Sarah, the older sister, was found days after that, disoriented, in shock, suffering from severe amnesia. The report stated she was relocated to relatives and given a new identity to aid in her recovery and to protect her from the trauma. Eleanor felt a profound, chilling cold spread through her veins. Sarah Johnson, not Eleanor Warren. Lily Johnson, not Sophie. The woods, the scream, her dreams. It was all real. Her entire life built on a fabricated identity, was crumbling before her eyes. The echo was not just a metaphor. It was her own buried truth, screaming to be heard. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Memory. The newspaper clipping. A brittle window into a past that wasn't hers shattered Eleanor's carefully constructed reality. Sarah Johnson, Lily Johnson, not Eleanor and Sophie. The images from her nightmares, the haunted woods, the chilling scream, they were not phantoms of a stressed mind, but echoes of a brutal, forgotten truth. Eleanor felt a terrifying exhilaration, a primal need to understand the depths of this deception. Her first call was to Mark. He arrived quickly, his initial skepticism replaced by profound shock as Eleanor laid out the evidence. "Eleanor," he whispered, this is beyond anything. Your whole life has been a lie." The magnitude of the secret was overwhelming. Eleanor, or rather Sarah, desperately needed to unlock her fragmented memories. She sought out Dr. Emily Blake, a highly respected neurologist specializing in trauma-induced amnesia. Dr. Blake, after reviewing Sarah's case and the unusual circumstances, agreed to take her on, recommending a combination of therapy, gentle regression techniques, and eventually hypnotherapy. As Sarah began her sessions with Dr. Blake, fragmented images and sounds began to surface. A vivid picture of a red blanket, the smell of pine, a man's angry voice, a sharp, metallic glint. The memories were agonizing, painful to retrieve, but Sarah pushed through, desperate for clarity. Simultaneously, Sarah contacted the Charlotte Police Department, asking for assistance with an unusual cold case inquiry. Detective Thomas Reed, a seasoned but skeptical officer, was assigned to her. Sarah, with Mark's support, presented him with the newspaper clipping, Mrs. Crowley's testimony, and the undeniable fact of her own amnesia and the fabricated identity. Reed, intrigued by the sheer oddity of the case, agreed to look into the Johnson girls' disappearance from 1970. Reed's initial investigation into the archived Shenandoah National Park incident uncovered startling discrepancies. The official report on Lily Johnson's death had been oddly cursory, quickly attributed to a fall, despite inconsistencies in the evidence. The subsequent relocation of Sarah Johnson to distant relatives had been expedited with unusual speed, bypassing standard social services protocols. It suggested a high-level intervention, not to protect a traumatized child, but to bury a truth. As Dr. Blake delved deeper into Sarah's subconscious through hypnotherapy, the true horror of that day in 1970 began to unfold. It wasn't an accident. It was something far more sinister. Sarah's voice, distant and childlike under hypnosis, narrated the events. "The red blanket. Mommy had it. We were playing by the stream. Daddy came. He was yelling. He was so angry. Mommy was crying. He pushed her. She fell. She hit her head on the rock. The water, red. Lily ran to Mommy. Daddy grabbed her. He threw her. She hit a tree. She cried. Then she stopped." The therapist's office grew cold. Sarah's voice trembled. "Daddy, he looked at me. He looked at me with Mommy's eyes. But it wasn't Mommy. It was fire. He told me to forget everything. He picked up Mommy's blanket. He left it by the stream, like an accident." The truth was a tidal wave of unimaginable pain. Sarah's mother, Marilyn Johnson, had not died accidentally. She had been murdered by her husband, Robert Johnson. Her younger sister, Lily, had died from injuries sustained when their father violently threw her, and Sarah, an 8-year-old girl, had witnessed it all. The program of protection for her trauma was a horrifying cover-up. Her father, seeing her in shock, realizing she was a witness, had orchestrated her relocation and new identity through corrupt channels. The Warrens, her adoptive parents, had been paid to take her, to keep her silent, to raise her as Eleanor, to erase Sarah Johnson from existence. The amnesia wasn't a natural psychological defense. It was a reinforced barrier, a deliberate act by a desperate, murderous father to bury his crime. The ghost of memory had finally found its voice, and it screamed of a brutal, unspeakable betrayal. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The raw, agonizing truth, unleashed by Dr. Blake's therapy session, left Sarah, no longer Eleanor, utterly shattered. Her mother, Marilyn, murdered. Her sister, Lily, also a victim. And the perpetrator, her own father, Robert Johnson, who had orchestrated her identity erasure to escape justice. The meticulous order of Eleanor Warren's life had been utterly demolished, replaced by the chaotic, agonizing reality of Sarah Johnson's suppressed past. Detective Reed, upon hearing Sarah's fragmented recollections under hypnosis, corroborated with the details he had uncovered in the cold case files. The inconsistencies, the rushed closure, the unusual relocation, it all pointed to a deliberate cover-up. He immediately opened a full homicide investigation into the deaths of Marilyn and Lily Johnson. Their first target, Robert Johnson. He had vanished after 1970, leaving no trace. But Sarah remembered a detail, a small recurring dream fragment, a unique ornate compass her father always carried, engraved with the initials RJ and a specific rare constellation symbol. Mark, with his knowledge of antiques, identified the symbol as an obscure 18th century navigator's mark, unique to a specific lineage of cartographers from coastal Virginia. Detective Reed's team, using this new lead, traced the lineage of the Johnson family back to a small, isolated community in coastal Virginia. They found an old, run-down shack registered under a series of shell companies and an aging, reclusive man living under the alias Richard Jones. It was Robert Johnson. When Detective Reed and his team, accompanied by Sarah and Mark, finally confronted him, Robert Johnson was a shadow of his former self, frail and weathered by time, but his eyes still held a flicker of the cold calculation Sarah remembered. The old compass, worn with age, hung on a chain around his neck. Upon seeing Sarah, Robert's face went ashen. He recognized her. The daughter he had presumed lost to memory, the witness he had silenced, stood before him, her eyes clear, no longer clouded by amnesia. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice barely audible. You remember." Under interrogation, faced with overwhelming evidence and Sarah's unwavering gaze, Robert Johnson finally confessed. It had been a violent argument, a sudden, explosive rage. Marilyn had threatened to leave him, to expose his shady business dealings. In a fit of uncontrolled fury, he had pushed her, and she had fallen, hitting her head on a rock. Lily, running to her mother, had witnessed it. In a panic, he had thrown Lily, causing her fatal injuries. He had then staged the scene to look like an accident, relying on the chaos of the time and his own connections to manipulate the investigation. "I saw you, Sarah," he confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were in shock. I knew I couldn't let you remember. I had connections. The Warrens, they needed money. They agreed to take you, to raise you as their own, to keep you quiet. I thought you would never remember. I thought I was safe. The confession was a chilling confirmation of Sarah's worst fears, but also a profound liberation. The lies were exposed. The truth, though agonizing, was finally free. Sarah's reunion with Mrs. Agnes Crowley was equally poignant. Agnes, her blue eyes filled with tears, embraced Sarah. I knew it, Sarah. I knew it wasn't right. I saw him that day, cleaning the campsite too carefully. I heard things, but no one believed an old woman. I waited for you. Agnes provided a few more pieces of the puzzle. Small details about Robert Johnson's erratic behavior leading up to the tragedy, observations that solidified the case against him. The legal process was swift. Robert Johnson, now an old man, was tried and convicted for the murders of Marilyn and Lily Johnson. Justice, delayed for over 5 decades, was finally served. Sarah, attending the trial, felt a profound sense of closure, not of triumph, but of quiet, aching peace. The ghost of her past was finally laid to rest, allowing the real Sarah Johnson to step out of the shadows. The woman who had died in the last century was finally, truly alive. Chapter 5. The Reclamation of Self. With Robert Johnson brought to justice, Sarah, no longer Eleanor, embarked on the profound journey of reclaiming her true self. The initial rush of revelation had given way to a quiet, deep sorrow for the lost years, the stolen childhood, and the loving mother and sister she had been robbed of. Yet, amidst the grief, there was an unprecedented sense of freedom, an unburdening of a lifetime of subconscious unease. Her bond with Mark deepened, transforming from friendship into an unbreakable familial tie. He had been her rock, her unwavering support through the bewildering journey. He celebrated her triumphs and held her during her moments of profound sadness. Dr. Emily Blake continued to guide Sarah through therapy, helping her process the layers of trauma and reintegrate her fragmented memories. Sarah learned to navigate the emotional landscape of her past, to embrace the child she once was, and to understand the mechanisms her mind had employed to protect her from unimaginable pain. The amnesia, once a prison, now felt like a shield that had served its purpose, allowing her to survive. Detective Thomas Reed, who had become a reluctant ally, found a renewed purpose in his work. He became a staunch advocate for cold case investigations, particularly those involving suppressed memories or suspected cover-ups. He and Sarah maintained contact, their shared experience forging a unique bond of trust and mutual respect. Sarah began to piece together the remnants of her true family history. She visited the Shenandoah National Park, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a witness. She stood by the stream where her mother had died, remembering Marilyn's kindness, her laughter, her love. She placed wildflowers by the tree where Lily had fallen, honoring the innocent life stolen too soon. It was a painful pilgrimage, but a necessary one, transforming the site of her trauma into a place of remembrance and healing. She also learned more about the Warrens, the couple who had raised her. While their actions were morally reprehensible, driven by greed and fear, Sarah recognized that they had, in their own twisted way, provided her with a life. She chose not to pursue legal action against their estate, focusing instead on her own healing. The anger had faded, replaced by a quiet detachment. They were a chapter in her life, a necessary part of the story, but not her true beginning. Sarah made it a point to regularly visit Mrs. Agnes Crowley. Agnes, now seen as a local hero, reveled in Sarah's presence, their conversations filled with details of the old days, stories that helped Sarah fill in the blanks of her early childhood. Agnes became a surrogate grandmother, a living link to the innocent world Sarah had lost. Eleanor Warren, the architect, began to integrate Sarah Johnson, the survivor, into her professional life. She channeled her newfound understanding of resilience and the human spirit into her designs, creating spaces that fostered healing, connection, and truth. Her architecture became more profound, more resonant, reflecting her own journey of transformation. The name Eleanor became a part of her past, a reminder of the false identity she had shed. She formally changed her name back to Sarah Johnson, embracing her true heritage, her true self. It was a symbolic act of reclamation, a powerful statement of her liberation. A woman who had been told she died in the last century had in fact been reborn. Sarah Johnson, once a ghost in her own life, now stood fully, vibrantly alive, grounded in her truth, and ready to embrace the future, free from the echoes of a buried past. Her journey was a testament to the extraordinary strength of the human spirit to seek, to find, and ultimately to heal. Chapter 6: The Threads of a Reborn Life. Years unfolded, transforming Sarah Johnson from a woman haunted by a forgotten past into a beacon of resilience and truth. Her life, once meticulously compartmentalized, now flowed with an authentic purpose, enriched by the complex layers of her rediscovered identity. Her professional life as an architect took on a new dimension. Sarah specialized in restorative architecture, designing spaces that honored history while fostering healing. She worked on projects converting old, forgotten buildings into community centers for trauma survivors, or designing quiet memorial gardens, channeling her own journey of reclamation into tangible, impactful creations. Her designs became imbued with a deeper empathy, a silent narrative of endurance and hope. Sarah became a passionate advocate for victims of violent crimes and those who had lost family members to unresolved mysteries. She worked closely with Detective Reed, sharing her story to help other cold case units understand the subtle signs of suppressed memory and orchestrated cover-ups. Her experience served as a powerful reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, could indeed be found. Reed, now a friend, often consulted her, recognizing her unique insights into trauma and deceit. Her relationship with Mark deepened into a profound, unconventional partnership. They remained best friends, but also silent confidants, a chosen family forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances. They often spent evenings in Mark's antique shop, surrounded by objects with their own forgotten stories, sharing quiet conversations that delved into the profound questions of life, loss, and the enduring power of truth. Mrs. Agnes Crowley became a beloved matriarchal figure in Sarah's life. Sarah visited her regularly, bringing her groceries, sharing meals, listening to Agnes's gentle ramblings that often contained small, precious fragments of Sarah's earliest childhood memories with her mother and sister. Agnes lived long enough to see Sarah fully embrace her identity and find peace, a silent witness to the triumph of truth. The Shenandoah National Park, once a place of terror, slowly transformed into a sacred ground for Sarah. She would visit regularly, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of connection to her mother and Lily. She started a small, discreet memorial plaque in a secluded part of the park, dedicated to Marilyn and Lily Johnson, remembered, loved, free. It was a personal act of healing, a quiet promise that they would never be forgotten again. Sarah also learned more about her extended biological family, the distant relatives of the Johnsons who had been oblivious to the tragedy. She cautiously reached out, sharing her story with a few, finding a mix of shock, disbelief, and eventual compassion. She built a few tentative connections, finding comfort in knowing that her lineage extended beyond the trauma, that she had a deeper root system than she had ever known. The false name, Eleanor Warren, eventually became a distant echo, a shadow of a life that once was. Sarah Johnson was her undeniable identity, fully reclaimed, deeply understood. She carried the scars of her past, but they no longer defined her. They shaped her, gave her strength, and allowed her to live a life of profound authenticity. The woman who had died in the last century had truly been reborn. Her story became a testament to the enduring human spirit's capacity for resilience, for seeking truth against all odds, and for finding profound healing even in the darkest corners of a suppressed past. Sarah Johnson was not just alive, she was thriving, a vibrant testament to the power of a life unburdened by secrets. Chapter 7. The Unveiling of Light. In her later years, Sarah Johnson moved beyond mere survival, entering a phase of deep contemplation and quiet contentment. The echoes of her past no longer haunted her. They informed her, creating a profound depth to her character and an unparalleled empathy for others. Her architectural work continued to evolve, focusing on projects that honored lost histories and facilitated new beginnings. She designed a national memorial for families of victims whose loved ones were lost to unsolved cases, a place of quiet reflection and shared grief, ensuring that no other family would feel their loss was dismissed or forgotten. Her designs were not just structures. They were narratives, built from her own experience of reclaiming a lost story. Sarah authored a memoir, a powerful and poignant account of her life as Eleanor Warren and her rebirth as Sarah Johnson. Titled The Echo Woman, it delved into the psychology of repressed memory, the ethics of identity concealment, and the enduring human need for truth and belonging. The book became a national bestseller, resonating with countless readers who found courage and understanding in her vulnerability. Through her book, she openly shared her journey, giving a voice to those who lived with hidden pasts. Her relationship with Mark remained a constant, unwavering presence. They often retreated to his antique shop, sharing quiet moments, surrounded by the remnants of other people's forgotten lives. Mark, too, in his own way, found a renewed sense of purpose, recognizing the stories held within the objects he sold, much like the stories held within Sarah's memory. Sarah continued her work with Dr. Emily Blake, seeing therapy not as a sign of weakness, but as an ongoing journey of self-discovery and maintenance. She became an advocate for mental health awareness, particularly regarding trauma and memory, speaking at conferences and sharing her insights to help others navigate their own hidden emotional landscapes. The media, captivated by her incredible story, often sought her out. Sarah approached these interviews with dignity and a clear purpose: to educate, to advocate, and to illuminate the dark corners of medical and legal systems that had once allowed such a profound injustice to occur. She spoke not for herself, but for the voiceless, for those whose truths remained buried. She often visited the quiet, unassuming grave of Mrs. Agnes Crowley, who had passed away peacefully a few years after Robert Johnson's trial. Sarah brought her flowers, sharing silent gratitude for the old woman's unwavering conviction. The single thread of truth that had unraveled a lifetime of lies. Agnes, the Echo Woman, in her own right, had been the catalyst for Sarah's rebirth. In the end, Sarah Johnson found not just peace, but a deep, unshakable sense of self. The fear of her past had vanished, replaced by a profound acceptance of her entire, complex history. She was no longer defined by the trauma, but by her resilience, her unwavering pursuit of truth, and the remarkable journey she had undertaken to reclaim her own life. The woman who had died in the last century had not only returned, she had flourished, living a life of profound meaning, a testament to the enduring power of light over darkness.